committee today in the absence of Paul Fuller. Any errors are entirely my fault. Any credit will be due to my team sitting next to me. So welcome to members of the public, the press. I'd like to introduce the officers. To my right is Ollie Bolter, Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure, and next to him is Sarah Wilkinson, our Planning Development Manager. To my left is Ben Gard, Legal Advisor, Jodie Gibson, Legal Advisor, Marie Bartlett, Committee Clerk, and to my right there is Neil Troughton from the Highways. Bit of housekeeping first. There are no fire drills during this meeting, so if you hear the fire alarm go, then assume it's a real thing. You'll need to evacuate the building. You go out the way you came in. That applies to the upper gallery as well. And you turn left down the stairs into the car park and assemble in the car park. Under no circumstances, use the lift. And please don't re-enter the building until you've been told it's safe to do so. I would ask, please, that all mobile phones, if they're not already, are switched off, please. And I would also remind all speakers to use the microphone. People, if they are watching or following a recording afterwards, will not be able to hear you if you don't speak into the microphone. All they'll see is your mouth moving up and down like a gawping fish. No picnics either, please, unless it's for a medical need. As for members, just to remind you that you cannot leave the council chamber during the presentation, which will start with Sarah, or debate. If you leave, you will be unable to vote on that application. And I'd like to remind members of the public, both in the room and watching virtually, that they are present purely to observe this process. They will not be permitted to speak unless they have registered to speak in advance. There is those of you that have the agendas that have been issued, by the way, I have exercised my discretion and altered the order of service, so to speak. So we're going to be starting actually with the application for 3 The Avenue, Gurnard, and then following that will be the McDonald's application. I bet some of you are familiar with the speaking system, but we have a traffic light system here, basically. So when you're asked to speak, the green light will display. The amber light will flash for a few seconds. I think there's probably about 20 seconds or 30 seconds left. And then that's it. I'll have to shut it down just to make sure, in the interest of fairness, that everybody actually gets an equal time to speak. In that regard, we have Julie Jones. Oh, Julie.
Apologies, Chair. It was just really regarding leaving the chamber. It's a very hot evening going back, got an amber weather warning. If members want to go and get extra water, I mean, I've got a cup here. I just wondered how we're going to manage that during the meeting. If you want to go and get water from just outside.
Yeah. If anybody does need a break, comfort break, water, whatever, just put your hand up. And just make a gagging. No, just put your hand up, and I will make a short adjournment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So, moving on to the agenda. First of all, any apologies, Marie?
No. Councillor Fuller gave his apologies, and Councillor Jones Evans is substituting for him.
Okay, thank you. So, Matt.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, I may need to leave between sort of 6:30 and 7 if we're still going then.
Okay.
Apologies for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair, so I need to leave at about 5:40 because I have another meeting at 6. Apologies.
Okay, well, let's get on with it then. Rob, welcome, Councillor Newton. You've only missed the preamble. I don't need to go through the fire drill again with you, Rob, do I, or anything like that? I think you probably know it by hand now. Okay, so now the previous minutes. Do we have a proposer? Is there an accurate record? Thank you, Councillor Price. A seconder, Councillor Jeffries.
So on a point of order, Chair, I don't think you actually called for a vote on those minutes. I think you took a proposal and second. For formality, should we have not had a formal vote?
Yep, okay, yes, if you'd like a vote, all those in favour? Thank you, Councillor Garrett. That was my error. Right, now, moving on. Public question time. We're dealing with the declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? None? I have to say, I've never been at a meeting where there have been many declarations of interest. Right, so no declarations of interest. Right, public question time, 15 minutes. No public questions have been received. So I think we're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is the planning report. The order of play is that basically once comments have been heard from all sides, then we'll open the debate on the item. And once all questions have been heard, the last agenda item will be members' question time. But I don't know if any have been submitted. No? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we're starting in reverse order as it was on the old agenda with 3 The Avenue, Gurnard, Cows, and we have Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, members. The application site is located on the southeastern side of the avenue in Gurnard, as shown on the screen, as outlined in red. The existing property is a bungalow. That's it, just in a kind of Google image, just for context. It's obviously, again, the area within the red line, within what is a built-up residential area of Gurnard. The current bungalow is somewhat an anomaly in the street scene. We went to site on Friday, a number of you saw that. It's within an area of the avenue which is otherwise 2-storey properties, with the bungalows being on the kind of lower side or the kind of further down the road. The images on screen just show that exact existing bungalow, the neighbouring property, the existing garage, which is sought to be demolished, and some of the boundaries of that site. Just moving through some more images of other properties up and down the avenue itself, as well as this property being the neighbouring property, which we'll refer to a number of times during the presentation, because that's the property that's the most impacted as a result of the proposed development comparatively. The proposed development, you've got the before and after on the screen in front of you there. So the proposal incorporates some alterations to the frontage of the property to provide 2 nosing spaces different from the existing situation where you've got one nosing space and then a garage space. So it wouldn't increase parking, but just provide an easier configuration with some alteration to the frontage there. The application would also incorporate the demolition of the existing garage and then an extension which would infill that space that results from the removal of the garage. I've incorporated, some floor plans which just help to show those changes certainly to the roofscape. So the application would involve alterations to the roof of the existing bungalow, which would see it go from a hip roof to a gable roof either side, as well as a projecting gable to the front, dormers to the rear and a couple of roof lights to the rear. The alterations would allow for the side extension, as you can see in the before and the after here, as well as accommodation within that roof space. And moving to the elevations, that is, those are the elevations of the existing property and the applications of the proposed development, which see those changes. You'll see that the changes also include a small kind of porch canopy area to the front between those two projecting gable features, or hipped features, I should say, as well as the recovering of the bungalow. So it would go from a brick to a render, incorporating an element of timber style cladding to the front and to the dormer cheeks. What I will do is just step back a couple, apologies, just for clarity. On site, the question was asked in terms of the proximity of the development to the boundary. Obviously, we looked at the proximity of the existing property on the neighbouring side, but also just wanted to clarify that the distance at this point would be 0.5 metres, and then at the front it tapers, and therefore that would be a metre. So that's the kind of proximity to the boundary, and then the neighbouring property is set off its own boundary, which is outlined in the report. Moving back to the slide order, apologies. I've incorporated some images of the neighbouring property, or the side elevation of the neighbouring properties, this being number 1, the avenue, and then this property being number 5, the avenue, which is the one that's referenced the most in the report, and we just saw the front elevation of, both from over the fence and then at first floor level. We discuss, or the report discusses, the kitchen window a number of times. That is this window here at the point of the cursor. So that is the window we're referring to. This is some images out of that window currently, both in relation to through that window into the area of land between, you can see the roof of the existing bungalow there, and then you can see the kind of amenity area of the existing property, and then the outlook from that window. I've incorporated some images that were within the assessment submitted by the objector in relation to the kind of, they've undertaken a right to light assessment. This is covered in quite a lot of detail in the report in terms of what that says. I thought for completeness it would be useful to incorporate some images from that for councillors, so they're fully aware of what we're talking about when we refer to these points. So the window in question is window 4 here. That is the kitchen window we're referring to. And there's a before and an after in relation to the proposed scale of the extension and the alterations to the roof. So the ridge height doesn't change, but obviously it goes from a gable to a hip. You've then got another before and after image. You can see the extension in this area here. So it's the blue that's coming in association with that, and that's from a slightly different angle of that property. I've then incorporated this, which I think is a useful element of that study, that right to light assessment that was submitted with the application. So the green areas are areas that don't currently provide visible sky, in essence, as part of the no skyline assessment. The red area is an area that would not receive visible sky as a result of the proposed development. Councillors, you will see that there is a slight update on this paper because I wanted to ensure that you had all the information that was incorporated within that assessment in terms of the reduction that would result in the application. Because in terms of the officer recommendation, you'll see that in essence, officers are acknowledging there would be a loss of light to that room. That isn't in question. The assessment demonstrates that, and you can see and tell that in relation to the proximity. However, the assessment talks about a noticeable change. So the percentage, the 0.8, the degree of difference that it refers to is what will result in notable change. It is officers' opinion that yes, there will be a notable change in that room, but that change will not be harmful so as to result in refusal of the application based on the nature of the room, the proximity, the nature of the development and all other matters, as well as the nature of the area. And it is quite a dense residential area. I've incorporated this one, which shows the same statistics in relation to the first floor, which is I believe that's a bathroom. It's certainly not a habitable room, and therefore it's given significantly less weight in relation to the consideration from a planning perspective. And that, members, is the application in front of you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's quite clear. Any questions arising from that? No, in that case, we'll proceed with the objectors. First on the list, I have Mary Sparrow. And thank you, Mary. You have 3 minutes, Mary. Can I remind you just to put your speaker on?
Sorry, forgot button. Right, Chair and members, I am the owner occupier of number 5, The Avenue. I object to the current planning proposal for number 3, The Avenue, on the grounds that it is a very large building on a very small plot, and because of this will cause an injury to my house. The building is so large that the first planning proposal actually had the southwest elevation of the new build over my land border and into my garden. On the 10th of June, presumably having viewed my letter of objection dated the 22nd of May, the new build was moved away from my border by 1 metre. I would like to show the committee the new proposed building based on this current proposal, but actually your lovely lady has already shown that. My windows as they are here and my windows as they will be blotted out by this enormous building. If this build is built to these specifications, situated only 1 metre from my border and up a hill, they are up a hill from me, all I will see every morning from my kitchen will be a sheer brick wall, 2 stories high, cutting out the view of my sky, and I am advised nearly 40% loss of light to my kitchen. I would in effect be living in a basement on my northeastern elevation. It would be overwhelming, oppressive and detrimental to my property and me. Currently, I look out onto a 1-story bungalow almost 8 metres from my kitchen wall and 4 metres from my border. The new build would be situated 3 metres nearer to my kitchen window, 2 stories, not 1 story. I have been advised by my builder and friend, John Nicholson, that I have the rights to object to the planning proposal on loss of light and amenity to my kitchen. The planning officer's report completely acknowledges that this is the case, but in effect says it doesn't matter. Actually, it does matter when there is clearly an obvious alternative. Redesign the proposed building so it does not cause a loss of light injury or loss of amenity to my kitchen or house. I have no objection to a 2-story building as long as it's situated on the current footprint of the existing bungalow, the southwest elevation remaining where the southwest elevation of the existing bungalow is now, 4 metres from my border. I am sure the architect can design a substantial 2-story house within those parameters without having to cut out nearly 40% of the light to my kitchen. I would be delighted to agree a workable compromise, and I'm very disappointed that I was not politely approached prior to this application being made. Many planning applications have been made during my late husband's and my 45 years, 3 properties before this one. When we moved into number 5, we needed to build a downstairs bedroom and bathroom for my elderly mother. We asked number 3 how they felt as it was on their side. They asked for a 1-story extension and not the proposed 2. So John Nicholson built us a 1-story extension at our request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
It was pretty well timed.
If I could just ask you to pop your speaker
That's
off.
the job.
Next, I have Mr. Matthew Jones, and you have 3 minutes.
Chair, members, thank you. I speak for our client Mary Sparrow at 5 The Avenue, whose property is adjacent to the application site. We ask you to refuse the application under policy DM2 or defer it for redesign. Our assessment shows the results are not marginal. Window 4 is the kitchen's only window. Its vertical sky component experiences a reduction of 33% and daylight distribution is reduced by 25%. The kitchen therefore fails both relevant BRE daylight tests, which allow up to a 20% reduction. There are also substantial losses to the ground floor disability accessible bathroom used daily by our client. The windows experience vertical sky component reductions of over 30%. The central problem is not simply that the officer reaches a different planning judgment, it is that the reasons given do not answer the technical evidence. First, the officer's report says window 4 is the kitchen's only window, but later refers to another window in a utility room as if that reduces the concern. This cannot compensate for the failure of the kitchen's only window or the loss of light. Second, and more importantly, the report confuses daylight with sunlight. Vertical sky component measures diffuse skylight from an overcast sky. The no skyline test measures the area of a room with a view of sky. Neither is a direct sunlight test. Yet the officer's report describes the no skyline result as direct sunlight and answers the failure by saying the sun passes the application building by afternoon. That may address direct sunshine, it does not answer the measured loss of daylight. I say this respectfully, that terminology risks giving members a misleading picture of what the assessment measures. The BRE guide is advisory, but flexibility is not a substitute for analysis. The guide says alternative targets should be developed logically and consistently. The officer's report gives no alternative target and no calculation showing why reductions of 1/3 and 1/4 are acceptable. The same report describes this setting as good-sized detached period houses in good-sized plots, not a dense city centre context. The Isle of Wight is not London, and there are corresponding higher expectations of light. The discussion about whether this kitchen is a habitable room under different parts of building regulations is also a distraction. For daylight assessments, kitchens are rooms where daylight is required. In fact, the minimum illuminance targets for new builds require the highest lux targets for kitchens. Whether there is a dining table does not make a 1/3 reduction in available skylight less real. This is especially significant because my client is disabled and spends considerable time in the affected rooms. Policy DM2 requires relevant information in regard to adjacent buildings and topography. Here, 5 The Avenue is downhill of the proposal, while the proposal replaces a garage with deeper, taller built form and changes a hip to a gable close to the boundary. National and local policy requires a high standard of amenity for existing as well as future users. Members, the only detailed evidence described in the officer's report shows 2 clear daylight failures to the kitchen and substantial additional losses to disability bathroom windows. The solution is design, reduce the height and massing, or move it further away. Please refuse the application of the policy DM2. Failing that, please defer it for a daylight-led redesign. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And finally, we have Leah Mew, the agent, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application on behalf of the applicants. At its heart, this is a modest householder proposal that fits within planning policy and will not cause any material harm to neighbours, the character of the avenue, biodiversity interests or adjoining land. The application simply replaces the existing garage with a new side extension, keeping the roof ridge at one consistent height and making no increase to the existing roof height of the bungalow. In the context of the wider regeneration and redevelopment taking place nearby, this is a small and proportionate improvement to a family home. The avenue has a clear linear pattern of development, and the proposed extension would still leave enough space from neighbouring properties to avoid feeling dominant or overbearing. The gardens are not directly comparable in planning terms, and the applicant's garden reads as part of a normal residential street scene. The case officers have not asked for any further biodiversity information, and because this is a householder application, it's not subject to biodiversity net gain requirements. I had noted there were some discussions about ecology on some of the comments that have been made, so just to make that clear. The applicants are among a few young families remaining in Gurnard, a village where high house prices increasingly price families out. They have worked hard to get onto that property ladder and are seeking a genuine long-term family home for their 2 young children, aged 3 and 1. Without the ability to extend beyond 2-bedroom bungalow, they'd likely be forced to leave Gurnard altogether. A loss to the community, giving the families established nursery and school connections, and the contribution young families genuinely bring to family life, to village life. There is no material planning reason to prevent this modest addition to the property. It would make the home more practical for the family and improve its appearance while remaining well within the kind of household development normally assessed as acceptable under policy DM2 of the Island Plan. We respectfully ask members to look at this in the same proportionate and consistent way. On the boundary point, I appreciate there's been some concern about whether work would need to take place on neighbouring land. However, the proposals and the boundary relationship allows enough space for the foundation, construction and render to be completed from within the site. No boundary treatment needs to be removed, no work is required on neighbouring land, and everything would stay within the application's red line boundary. Number 5 is also 4.5 metres away from this boundary. There is a significant space between these two properties, even with the extension. With regards to the loss of light raised by the occupier of number 5, the avenue, only one ground floor window has been mentioned on the relevant neighbouring side, and there are no first floor windows on that elevation that have been brought into this consideration. The window in question, as we know, serves a kitchen, and the light survey does not identify it as a habitable room with a dining table, so it should not carry adverse weight under policy DM2. As such, it's felt that the scale of the extension, the separation distance, and orientation of the properties mean there would still be no unacceptable impact on residential amenity. It's also worth noting that number 5 already casts a significant shadow over the applicant's property because of its position to the southwest, something I've not seen noticed before. Against that existing background, and given how the two homes sit in relation to each other, one being 2-storey, this one being a 1.5-storey, this modest extension would not create a harmful additional impact on this single affected window, in my opinion. The completed chalet bungalow would still be lower and smaller, with less impact on light than number 5 itself. In summary, this proposal accords with policies DM2, DM11 and DM12 of the Island Plot Plan Core Strategy, as well as the MPPF. It is modest, well-designed extension that lets a hard-working young family stay in Gurnard without material harm to neighbouring amenity. For those reasons, we respectfully ask the committee to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments. You've explained the situation clearly and lucidly from your point of view. I know and understand how difficult it is to actually speak in public. So anyway, you stated your case, and I would now like to ask members if they have any questions, please. Ruben, Councillor Luddock.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the agent how many years the family's lived in the property up to the point of application? Stop. Sorry. Apologies.
Sorry, the question has to come through me. So
Apologies, Chair. Chair, could I ask how many years families lived in the property prior to the application?
It is through the chairman, thank you, Chair. It's my understanding between 3 and 4 years.
any other questions? No? Okay, then can I?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to clarify a point, the height of, could we just clarify the height of the existing wall that's that the objectors have spoken about, and the height of the proposed wall that would be in the same question, the exact difference in the height of them, and obviously the overall length, because it's going to be longer as well, isn't it? So if we could just understand the detail of that, I think it would be useful. Thank you.
I'll be honest, I don't have those figures in front of me. So if you give me a moment, I will see what I can do. Okay, Chairman, thank you. It's quick as a quick double check across them, but in terms of obviously bearing in mind the ridge height doesn't alter of the dwelling. So crudely, I'm going to share my screen, but apologies because this is incredibly crude, and what I say will be slightly different because I've noted it down, and where I've dropped my hand, as it were, doesn't correlate, but I have noted it down. So the existing bungalow, not including what is, oh, let me just remove that line that it's drawing while I'm talking. Apologies. That's not going to help us at all, is it? Okay, bear with me one more second. Sorry, Chairman. So the total width of, you'll have to apologise some of the lines that have come in. I'm going to turn off the measuring tool before it adds any more. And so what you have here is the total width of the existing bungalow, including the garage, which is to be demolished, is 14.25 metres approximately. The height to the existing eaves is 2.5 approximately. In relation to the proposed, you've got the ridge height for these front elements slightly alters, so that comes to 2.3. But the overall height to eaves would be 5.6, because obviously you're going from a hip to a gable, and the overall width of the property would be reduced in essence because you're bringing it a metre off the boundary, whereas the existing garage sits on the boundary. So from the front, that would be reduced from 14.25 to 13.5 approximately. So they are all approximate figures, but in answer to your question.
Any more questions? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. One of the objectors has clearly put before us their concerns about loss of light. We all know what it's like to go into a room, I'm sure experienced, where it is noticeably darker, but there must be a point at which we kind of very clearly would understand that has been too dark. Is there a kind of percentage level at which there's sort of like a grumble point or something that might lead to someone bringing forward an action on this? If I can follow up, but I'd like to get an understanding of this one, being only my second time out on this committee in the 9 years I've been on this authority.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a difficult one really, because the assessment that's been undertaken by the neighbour is a right to light assessment. That is not the planning consideration. So a planning consideration is, excuse me, no, I'm sorry.
Point of order. You've had your say.
Right to light is not a material planning consideration. Loss of light is, but
Excuse me, if you interrupt again, I shall ask you to leave.
as I said, right to light is not a material planning consideration. Loss of light is. The objector has submitted a light assessment, which officers have considered. It is based on guidance. So it's mainly based on guidance for architects and developers, not for local planning authorities, but it can be used as an indicator as to what is acceptable and appropriate. But every situation will be different, every element will be different. As I stated in the report, from a planning perspective, there is no definition of a habitable room. That's why in the officer report, we've referenced how building regs kind of assess it, because it changes. In some elements of building regs, it is a habitable room, a kitchen, and others it's not. For ventilation, it's not considered a habitable room. So it's a grey area. So officers in your report have provided an indicator of why they don't give significant weight to that as a habitable room based on it being a kitchen. In terms of, to answer your question, in terms of at what point it tips, should we say, I will just draw members' attention to the update paper, which provides some extracts from the objectors' report, together with kind of the paragraph 7.10 kind of through to probably 7.15, which talks about the building regs definitions of habitable space. What that talks about is what they call, has been referenced as the vertical sky components and the no skyline. And so it's all detailed in there what the difference between those elements are. One talks about a reduction that is less than 0.8 times the existing. As we've just set out in the update paper, the application would result in a 0.75 times. So it is slightly less. But what is important from officers' perspective in terms of undertaking that assessment is that what that report does is say that that change would be noticeable. Officers consider, yes, it would be noticeable, but it would not be harmful, which is the planning threshold. We're not looking at anything else. We're looking at the planning threshold. It then looks at what it equates to in terms of percentage, and that goes through that in terms of that percentage. So what we're saying is that we're acknowledging there would be a percentage of reduction in that light, both in terms of vertical sky component and the no skyline component. But based on all the factors set out in the report, officers don't consider that to be unacceptably harmful to the living conditions of the resident of that property from a planning perspective. I hope that answers the question.
And Councillor, just to further comments from me on this is you have before you from the objector a sunlight and daylight assessment on the adjacent property. And Ms Wilkinson has set out her assessment in the report before you of her assessment of how that balances in the planning judgment. And you'll hear a lot about planning judgment for those who are relatively new to the committee as we move through and deal with different applications. It is open to councillors, should they so wish, to come to a different conclusion on the acceptability of the loss of daylight and sunlight as put to you in the assessment in the planning balance. That is open to you. What you have before you in the recommendation is the planning officer's judgment based on that balance. So it is open to councillors to take the calculations that you've got and say, well, actually, we think that that harm is unacceptable and it's unacceptable because that is open to you. But what you have before you is the planning officer's professional judgment of all of that evidence. So I don't have anything further to add on that point. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ben, for explaining that. Okay, any more questions? No? In that case, we'll move on to debate. Any proposals? May I invite a proposal? No?
Just a comment, really, Chairman. The nub of the objections are that that this issue exists with the wall of the vertical wall of the new build element to this property, and it does seem to me that could have been overcome by. I'm no builder, but I would have thought it could be overcome by, I don't know, doing that with that wall. I had an extension built in my house before I became a councillor, and that was the very thing we had to do. We had to have a roof like that rather than a roof like that, so it reduced the wall height to the neighbouring property. It's very different because I live in a semi-detached house, whereas these are obviously detached. But I just that's just an opinion. I don't think it affects the way that I will view the outcome of or the way I vote on this particular application. But I just thought it is something that could have been overcome, I think, with maybe just a little bit more of a twist in the design, maybe, and create some space somewhere else. But obviously that would affect the overall visuals of the look of this property. So I can understand why the applicant's gone this way. So, just an opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Any more questions? Any more debate? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from the question I had, look, these are the difficult things, aren't they? Where it is perception and weight that we put on something, and what one person might consider noticeable, the extent to which they might consider that harmful to their enjoyment of their property and the use of a room, in this case, a kitchen. And we all have different uses of that. I'm sure somebody will stop me if I say anything incorrect, but my feeling is that a kitchen is not necessarily the primary place of occupation in a property, but it is a place of occupation. And the way in which one enjoys it, because you have to use it throughout the day, is very important. I do have a feeling that the issues of light can be mitigated. We can all do that. It does seem to me unfortunate that in the design side of things that there hasn't been. I think this is what Councillor Price, through your chair, was alluding to, that certain sensitivity around that could have been incorporated into the design. It is clear that the property would be an improvement to the street scene, in that the bungalow itself is out of keeping with that street scene, and there is no architectural merit to that property. So I think we are in that literal grey area, aren't we? We have to judge. We have to decide, as people who are not occupying a neighbouring property, the extent to which that we can place weight on the assertion that there is harmful impact. It does seem to be on the lower boundary of what is closing in to me on what is harmful. But at the moment, I cannot see that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that that is harmful beyond the point which would be noticeable, but is not necessarily harmful. But I know that will be something that I can easily say because I don't have to occupy the property of the objector, but I see merit in the rest of the application. I'm keen, though, actually, to hear from other members before we move to a decision, if they have views.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Any other comments? No, in that case, yes. Councillor Kirkby. In that case, I'm looking for a proposal then, please. From someone? Councillor Price.
I think it rests with me. I think really, the design of the building is going to correct an anomaly on the street scene. There's no doubt at all. It will provide a nice family home. I totally respect the objector's views on it, because until it's built, you can't really grip what the effect on the light will be. I don't think you can understand that, and it's very much going to be down to the opinion of obviously the people where they live, but until it's actually built, you can't physically understand what that effect will be. But in terms of planning, we have a application before us that's been through the correct channels. We've had all of the different views put to us. We've had the explanations from the planning officers, and I therefore feel that we should vote to accept this in line with the officers' conditional permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. A seconder?
You Chair, I just want to
Julie.
say a couple of words
Okay.
in support of the application and the office recommendation. I just carefully weighed up the important aspect of a lot of the light issue in the kitchen against the benefit of improved property, improved street scene, and accommodation for a growing young family. I think that's very important as well for our communities as well. I mean, I've got Newport Central, live in the centre of Newport. We live on top of each other, so we don't have, many of us live with you know, with restricting views and lights and that, but we tend to muddle on and make the best of things. But that's not saying it's not an important consideration, but looking at the levels of the light that potentially would be missed. I think on balance, that's why I want to second this recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. So can I ask all those in favour of granting the permission, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Against?
None.
Abstentions?
None.
Permission granted. Does anybody want a 5-minute adjournment? Go and top up their water.
We need one chair to move the next people down.
Yeah.
But if you can say to councillors not to speak to anybody in the adjournment.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Items with anyone.
Okay, we're going to adjourn now till 5 to 5. Just to councillors, you're not to discuss the forthcoming application. It's nearly 5:02. I think everybody's here. So we will proceed with the second item on the agenda.
Lovely timed.
Late for the party as always, councillor Kirkby. Okay, we're now proceeding with the second item on the agenda, which is 25/01634/FUL, and that's land adjacent Esplanade Garage, fronting Three Gates Road in Northwood. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The application site as shown on the slide through a Google Earth image is the area outlined in red on the slide in front of you. It's an area of 0.26 hectares on the southern side of Three Gates Road. For locational purposes, I'm just going to point out some identifying features that councillors you will be aware of to make it easy to locate it, but we were there on Friday. But here you have Esplanade Garage. You've then got Three Gates Business Park, or Three Gates Industrial Estate, I should say, here. You've then got, and we'll look at it more closely, but residential properties that are referred to in the report in this location. So we will just look at that in a plan form, both at a further and a closer view. So the report references 4 residential properties. You've got Daphne Cottage and Green Cottages, which are here, which are the terrace of listed buildings that are referred to. You've then got, and I'm going to say it's Meletia. Apologies if I've pronounced that completely wrong, but the bungalow that we saw on site, which is located there at the point of the cursor. The proposed access, as we looked, would be directly opposite that bungalow. So just for locational purposes, that's what we saw on Friday. What I also want to highlight is just the footpath that's referenced in the report and that we saw on Friday. So the footpaths, CS7 is located here opposite that crossing point in the road. We'll look through some images and you can see that in more detail. Here you've got the open frontage of the Esplanade, as well as the car park for, we believe it's the staff car park, which sits immediately adjacent to the boundary of the site. And then the bungalow referenced and just the end there of those listed cottages. Oh, sorry, I should say they're locally listed cottages, not nationally listed. So they are locally listed, just for clarity. You then have some views across the site, those locally listed cottages just in these at the point of the cursor here and here to help you locationally. This part of the site shows that area to the east, which is the kind of more open area. And then you've got the site then kind of tapers, as we saw on Friday, into more of a triangle that is quite overgrown. You know, we looked over into that area and then images up and down the road. If we just move through those, again, an image from the existing access into the site or the existing opening that we walked through, and then some other views up and down at Three Gates Road. Here is that footpath that we've referenced just at this point here. The red dog bin probably helps locate that the best in that image. So the application seeks consent for a drive-through and restaurant with an associated car park. As shown on the plan. As outlined previously, the proposed access would come in here opposite that existing bungalow onto Three Gates Road. I will just draw councillors' attention to the update paper you've been provided, which hopefully you've had an opportunity to review prior to the presentation. I have just put in a couple of images. This one's not particularly easy to see, but this was the plan that we had on site. Just because when we were on site, there was some confusion over the visibility displays from that proposed access and some concerns raised in regards to the whether it was compliant or not. You know, Island Roads confirmed on site that it was compliant. I thought it was just helpful because obviously officers are not recommending refusal on highway safety. Island Roads are not recommending refusal on highway safety grounds. I just wanted to include this image. It's not very easy to see, so I have got another one, but the purple dashed line is a visibility. If councillors can see it, there's a red dashed line that shows the existing hedge line. I will go to this plan, which shows those visibility displays much better. The application does have compliant visibility displays, not least because the proposal obviously results in the removal of the existing planted frontage and their replacement of that with a 2.4 metre fence set back outside the visibility displays. But also, and the reason why I highlighted the update paper, The application also includes the widening of the existing pavement to 3 metres. That's in line with an element of the LC WIP for this area, which provides greater sustainability links. I wanted to make that clear because it's not set out in the report. So when you combine the removal of the existing hedgerow together with the widening of the footpath, those visibility displays are completely compliant. When we looked on site, I think with the plan, there was some confusion as to what point in the highway the furthest element of this visibility display hits. In essence, it's still on the pavement at this point. So any cars approaching from this direction would be able to view the entrance and vehicles exiting and entering the site from here. So it is fully compliant with those visibility displays. I wanted to make that clear because there was a question about that on site. I've also included this, which it may be very difficult to see, but I thought it might be helpful because it shows those blue areas being the areas that will be given over from the site to provide that 3 metre widening. I've incorporated some elevations of the proposed restaurant. It is a relatively standard McDonald's drive-through. You will have seen them before in terms of the proposed elevations. And then I think that there's a floor plan there and a roof plan for council, so you can see it is a single-storey building. I've also included some images of some of the other paraphernalia around the site. It being a drive-through, it has various other aspects. Oh, you want to mock the mouse. So as you come in through the entrance, you'll see the circle here shows where the proposed height restriction barrier would be. And then as you travel along that road, you have a split in that road, which would allow effectively drivers to take a different lane. And it's at this point where the circle is that you would then have the order points, which would have these canopies. So these elements of the scheme are included, as well as the building and obviously the infrastructure associated with it. So that's kind of the built form that forms part of the application. We have some visuals of the proposed scheme that are provided by the applicant in terms of before and after. As you're going kind of towards Place Road, you can see a before and then an after with the building here, and then one in relation to travelling down the road towards the roundabout, and then you've got it in view. I would say that these have a slight health warning with them, normally because visuals generally have a health warning with them, but also obviously the proposal incorporates and does form one of the reasons for refusal, a 2.4 metre close boarded fence at the front of the site. The proposal is in essence, as well as some landscaping, the majority of that is proposed to be screened with ivy. The images show this as quite green in terms of that ivy, but I just wanted to say, obviously, this is a 2.4 metre close boarded fence that's running along that frontage. So councillors, you will be aware from the report that there are 6 reasons for refusal as part of this application. I've just got a slide to kind of cover each of these points, just to run through that. One of the reasons for refusal relates on proximity to the schools and other places where children may congregate. That will seem quite long-winded as a comment. That relates to a section of the MPPF. If I advise members that they may turn to, if they wish, paragraph 7.3 of the report, which sets out a quote from that policy, which in essence says that local authorities should refuse applications for hot food takeaways and fast food outlets within walking distance of schools and other places where children and young people congregate. That forms a reason for refusal of the application because the MPPF instructs us to refuse. You will see in your update paper that there is reference to an appeal, an allowed appeal in relation to this matter. However, officers have balanced the application that relevant elements in relation to this scheme and are satisfied that that is still a strong, sustainable reason for refusal in relation to this application. What I've included on this image is the blue dot is the application site. The orange dots are places at the top. So you've got in your report a table of walking distances to places where children and young people would congregate and schools. This shows a selection of those, this being Love Lane Primary School, which is not Love Lane Primary School at all, Lanes End Primary School, apologies. Lanes End Primary School, which is the closest school to the site, as well as Cowes Family Centre, Cowes Recreation Ground and Skate Park, which is directly accessed via footpath C7. So there's a direct route following this line here. to that recreation ground, as well as UKSA, which is slightly further away from the site. But the distances and the walking distances are set out in your report. The application is supported by this document, which shows that walking route from Lane's End to the site itself. I've also included this image, which I thought would be helpful, which shows the rights of way that are close to the site. So the report talks about CS7, which is this route here. The application site is obviously here. So that is directly opposite the application site and provides direct access to the recreation ground. You then have, actually from the same recreation ground, but they don't directly intersect, but you can walk through them, a further selection of footpaths which take you directly to the school. Therefore, in relation to that matter, officers are recommending refusal on that point. The second reason for refusal relates to the failure of the sequential test in relation to the application being a town centre use. Believe it or not, the NPPF does set out that a drive-through is a town centre use, and therefore it is necessary to look at the impacts on this town centre as a result of the development and undertake what is called a sequential test in relation to that. Councillors, some of you may be very aware of the sequential test in terms of retail and town centre development, others may not. So I'll very, very briefly set out in the report that in relation to a sequential test, you look at town centre sites, you look at edge of centre sites, and then you look at out of centre sites. You do not sequentially assess one out of centre site against another out of centre site, because one cannot be sequentially preferable to the other because they're simply out of centre. You then look at edge of centre sites. The general rule of thumb, and certainly the guidance in the NPPF, is that edge of centre is, I think, 300 metres from the town centre. That is shown in this red hatching as part of the submitted documentation. So that is how they've deemed that edge of centre site. As you will see from the officer report, officers disagree that Medina Yard sits out of centre and consider it to sit edge of centre. This is the entrance to Medina Yard, so it's off Medina Road. It is edge of centre. It hasn't had adequate consideration, as well as other sites that officers raise concern with. So one of the reasons for refusal, as set out in the report, is that the application has not got an adequate sequential test in relation to the impact of the development on the town centre. The third reason for refusal relates to impact on the character of the area. Primarily, councillors, we saw on site, we discussed this fence at the front of the site. The fence is fundamentally required to remove the impact that the development would otherwise have on the residential properties opposite the site in relation to light and noise. It is required, as far as environmental health are concerned, to mitigate those impacts. However, it is a 2.4 metre fence, a close-bordered fence, right up against that proposed boundary. What I've included is images of other frontages in relation to Three Gates Road. You will see this very open green frontage in relation to the neighbouring site at Esplanade, as well as the frontage on the opposite side of the road, which again is heavily planted. There is a fence there, but it is see-through with a fence with a hedge behind. It is a very green and open frontage there. This raises significant concerns from an officer perspective. There is also, and linked to that same reason for refusal, is the impact of the limited landscaping that's available because of the nature of the layout. It is a relatively small site for the scale of the development, and it leaves no space for meaningful landscaping. That links directly for the second reason for refusal. Well, no, sorry. 1, 2, 3, fourth reason for refusal, which relates, oh no, sorry, it's not that image, which relates to loss of the, in essence, in that there is a number of trees that would be lost. There is no fundamental objection to the loss of those trees, but they cannot be mitigated on site with appropriate planting because there is not enough space for landscaping. So the landscaping reason is kind of interspersed with an element in that the loss of trees cannot be mitigated on site because there is not the space to provide appropriate, meaningful landscaping to justify the loss of trees and planting as part of the application. That combines with reason for refusal 4, which discusses the impact of the potential impact of facts. So the report references T20 and T21. They're located here in that triangular bit we discussed. We are aware that they have previously had bat roosts in them. Either one or both of them have had bat roots in them. There's an indication that one of those trees has been removed. We're not clear which one. We're not clear which one had the bat roost in. That information hasn't been made available as part of this submission. Therefore, one of the reasons for refusal relates to the fact we simply do not have enough information with regards to the potential impacts on bats due to the loss of trees. A further reason for refusal relates to the biodiversity net gain. The biodiversity net gain legislation indicates that you should have regard to the biodiversity hierarchy. This hierarchy requires you to look on-site before off-site, before credits, before national credits. The application proposes off-site biodiversity. There are concerns from an officer perspective that it has not considered the hierarchy in moving to that option in terms of biodiversity net gain. Finally, the last reason for refusal relates to the impact on CS7. This is a reason for refusal that in essence would fall aside if the applicant entered into a legal agreement for a contribution towards improvements to this right of way. They have said they would do that if the application were recommended for approval. Because it hasn't, we don't have a legal agreement in place. In the absence of a legal agreement to secure such contribution, officers have no option to add this as a reason for refusal, because the impact of the additional footfall that would utilise this right of way would cause a harm to that right of way that would not be mitigated. So sorry, councillors, I've thrown a lot of information at you there in a relatively small space of time. So I'm just going to leave the slides on this one, which shows the proposed layout for the proposed development and the proximity of those neighbouring properties, but obviously happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for explaining so succinctly as well. Am I right in thinking that all of the speakers, you were all present in the chamber when the traffic light system was explained? Have you got any queries with it? No? Okay. In that case, then I'd like to ask Alex Hollis to speak, please.
Yes. Is that right? So firstly, I ask you to consider how we actually got to this point and how families are forced to fight for their homes and their communities against this kind of application. My front door is approximately 6 metres from the proposed site, and for over a year, this proposal has dominated our lives, causing months of anxiety and uncertainty. We love where we live and we're passionate about conserving its character. We have a petition with over 2,000 signatures demonstrating the strength of local opposition to this. I want to be clear, I'm not against development. This site already has planning permission for 6 eco houses. This is just the wrong development in the wrong place. The council's own policies exist to protect communities while encouraging appropriate development. In my opinion, this proposal conflicts with many of these policies. Green spaces and well thought out housing supports physical health, mental well-being and strong communities. I've read through the submissions, which rely heavily on mitigation measures, assumptions and predictions, but they can't change the reality of placing an intensive round-the-clock commercial operation directly opposite people's homes. I also ask you to reflect on a committee's own previous decision on a similar site next to Asda, where it was concluded that such a development would create urbanising form of harm the character of the area and result in the loss of important green buffer. Those conclusions apply equally here. Imagine if this was your home. Imagine opening your curtains every morning to illuminated signs and queues of traffic where there is currently green space. Imagine trying to sleep while headlights sweep repeatedly across your bedroom. Imagine sitting in your garden with the sound of engines and fast food smells replacing birdsong and nature. Planning decisions last for generations. Once this development is built, there is no going back. Today, you're deciding what kind of community Cowes will become. Your decision will change lives. We deserve more than 3 minutes to state our case and 18 months of stress. We deserve support from the people we support. We do not deserve to have to fight against planning applications from multinational corporations and let corporate America dictate the destruction of the British countryside. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, can I come please to Mr. Ben Hollis?
My family and I live directly opposite this site. The officer's report is unequivocal. The application fails planning policy. If this were purely a policy decision, we wouldn't all need to be in this room. But it's your privilege and responsibility to weigh up what the community needs. Tonight, for once, planning policy and local needs perfectly align. Let's start with the obvious. McDonald's will talk to you about jobs, but we all know the promise never matches what is delivered. That dangled carrot disappears and decision makers are left with Egg McMuffin on their faces. And there's nothing you can do about it. We've all seen this film before. Over decades, we've encouraged people out of their cars and to eat healthy meals. And tonight, you're being asked to approve a fast food drive-through, servicing thousands of cars and the only people walking to it being children from nearby schools and parks. Now think about the reality of living near this. Bright lights, tannoys, smells, an illuminated sign taller than my two-storey house, and closer to my home than the width of this room. Every single night. That's not just a paragraph in a report. That's a reality for me and my neighbours. McDonald's own criteria states that in black and white that they will not even consider a site unless they're confident they can drive vehicular movements to in excess of 15,000 per day. Might sound unreasonable, it might sound unbelievable, but I wouldn't doubt this American juggernaut's ability to do so. And here's a number that really matters. Families eat 3 meals a day, not 4. Every McDonald's meal sold is 1 less sold at an independent high street restaurant or cooked at home. Local businesses running modest margins will not survive that kind of competition. They close and local jobs go with them. This is not job creation, this is job displacement. A real job at a local business traded for a paper hat, a 0-hour contract, and chasing some gold star and a staff badge. McDonald's do not own this land. They will only buy it if you grant them permission. If you reject it tonight, it does not sit empty. It reverts back to being what's already approved. 6 much needed affordable homes. We're not NIMBYs. We didn't object to that application. Nobody needs a McDonald's. People need homes. It's not a difficult choice. Touching back on the planning officer's point on biodiversity, I think this frames the applicant's argument. Biodiversity net gain is a national minimum standard required by law on every application. If you or I wish to build a home on the site, or a school, or a doctor's surgery, or a community centre, we are required by law to comply with biodiversity net gain. This applicant does not comply. McDonald's are expecting you to give them special treatment. They are showing you they feel above the law and are asking you to validate their injustice. You have a responsibility to save us from this.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis. Just a reminder, please, to the public gallery, this is not a public meeting. It's a meeting to which the public are invited to attend. So please, no clapping and no booing. Thank you, Mr. Hollis. Now we come on to Mr. Richard Hollis. You have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear members of the committee, I am Richard Hollis. I'm no relation, former member of this committee and former chairman and vice chairman of this committee. I represent both Northwood Parish Council and Cowstown Council, who are both very strongly opposed to this application. It is rare that one sees an application with so many concrete facets that are against our island plan. Firstly, the detrimental effect on the living standards of nearby residents. You will have seen on the site visit that Three Gates Road is divided into 2. The verdant residential end, which is 100% residential, and the commercial end, and has various businesses that create no noise and produce minimal traffic with the exception of Aldi at the far end. Completely opposite to a drive-through which creates noise, pollution, light pollution, and added smells also from the prevailing wind, odours and litter in the night, let alone the inevitable rat problem. I'm sorry, it has to be said. Rats love discarded food and undisturbed long grass water runoff. Google McDonald's and rats and see the scale of the problem around the country. Rats spread serious diseases such as hantavirus to humans, which is an airborne disease from rat urine and feces. Right, back to the decent bit. This proposal is in the residential half. Totally inappropriate and against policy DM2 of the island plan, which is there to protect residential areas. I quote, the council will support proposals that protect, conserve and enhance the existing environment. I cannot see how anyone could say that putting a proposal like this application enhances or protects the built environment as DM2 requires. This application is also directly opposite the locally listed cottages, as you've heard. These are heritage assets which are protected by policy DM11, which seeks to protect such assets from insensitive development and which would have negative consequences to that asset. Secondly, the proposal would also be close to a school, as you've heard, Lanes End Primary. It is therefore against the National Planning Policy Framework, which is designed to protect the health of children, particularly in a recognised area of identified poor health and deprivation. We have an absolute duty to try to help those whose life expectancy is affected through diet. Your officers are absolutely right in identifying this as a strong reason to refuse this application. Equally important, thirdly, is the threat to the economic well-being of Cowes Town Centre. There are some 70 hospitality businesses in the town and 2 in Northwood, many of which are struggling to varying degrees. Many serve burgers, which can be 5, 10, 15% of their business, which can represent 100% of their profit and their viability. Hit or lose that and they become non-viable and they close. One burger specialist, Harbour Kitchen, has already done so, just at the threat of losing that trade, and has publicly stated such. The island plan has a policy to protect this very situation, policy DM9. DM9 says that the council will only support proposals that support the vitality and viability of the town centre. It goes on to say that any proposal for retail development, and this is retail, which falls outside of the identified town centre boundaries, will be assessed on a sequential and impact basis as outlined in the national policy. DM9, your officers have highlighted it. Let us touch on the suggested employment figures, which, as we mentioned, strangely seem to be the same nationally. The applicants have admitted, well, it's not really 120 jobs. Yes, they may offer some jobs, low paid, part-time, but what about the jobs that inevitably would be lost in the town or in Northwood due to business closures and the knock-on effect to their island suppliers? Remember, DM9. And what about the national policy to try and reduce the use of the car? This application is for a drive-through, just as it's been said, just as the name suggests. Please think detrimental harm. This fails DM2, fails to protect, conserve and enhance the existing environment and which has a requirement of high quality design. It fails DM11, fails to protect the heritage asset and its setting, fails DM9, fails to protect the vitality and the viability of the town centre, and it fails National Planning Policy Framework, which says refuse new hot food takeaways applications within walking distance of a school. And remember the loss of land for 6 much required houses. I believe that I have given you reasons to refuse, and the officers, this application in line with officer recommendation. Please remember, if you decide to pass it, you must give reasons based on material planning considerations. They are defined as objective legal factors concerning the use and development of the land, stating how the proposal aligns with the local development plans and national frameworks, which it does not. The officers are absolutely right. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Hollis, and within the 6 minutes as well. Thank you. Next, I would invite, please, Mr. Mike Spurgeon on behalf of the applicant.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, my name is Mike Spurgeon. I'm a planning consultant acting on behalf of McDonald's. I'd like to very briefly address some of the key planning issues. So the site is currently vacant, making no contribution to the local economy or serving any other active purpose. That has long been identified, as we've heard, as a development site, planning permission having been approved for other uses in the recent past. This proposal would, by contrast, provide a high quality new restaurant, resulting in a direct new job creation and associated economic growth. These benefits are widely recognised and reflected in the support received from almost 600 people who have actively expressed their support for the new development. Whilst concerns have been raised in relation to the school proximity, as we've heard, members are no doubt aware that...
Sorry, I'm going to have to pause it for the moment. Can you please take that banner down? This is being televised. Yeah. I'm going to have to advise you that you've had 2 warnings now. You won't get a third. If there's another interruption, I will have the gallery cleared. Carry on, please, Mr. Spurgeon, and we can give you some extra time at the end.
Thank you. Well, members are no doubt aware that the council approved a new McDonald's restaurant at Lake last year, which is significantly closer at around 200 metres to a school than is the case at this site. We'd respectfully suggest that a similarly balanced approach is appropriate here in the consideration of this application, where the nearest school is approximately 500 metres away. Given the conclusions reached by the inspector in the Basildon appeal decision, which is highlighted in the update report, this proposal is not considered to engage the presumption against hot food takeaways set out in paragraph 97 of the NPPF. As per those findings, there's no evidence to convincingly demonstrate that there would be specific harm to public health as a result of this proposal. And in concluding that there would be such harm, it would be based on assumptions which appear to have been made about the McDonald's operation. Whilst it's the case that 90% of the core menu items have less than 500 calories, and there is now a wide choice of food and drink items available to customers. The sequential assessment we prepared also confirms that there are no suitable or available alternative sites in Cowes. The sequential assessment is robust and fully accords with the requirements of national planning guidance, requiring any alternatives to be comparable in scale and kind to the form of development proposed, in this case a drive-through restaurant, which is obviously separate and not something which is necessarily suitable for a town centre site, or at least many of those which we have been assessed. The proposed restaurant has been carefully designed to minimise impacts from noise, odour or grease, while a lighting strategy has been designed to limit glare and light spill. These measures, along with placing limits on opening hours, would ensure that the restaurant would not result in unacceptable impacts on nearby residential properties. We do recognise that concerns have been raised by consultees in relation to ecology. I need to stress that the biodiversity net gain would be achieved through a combination of on-site enhancements and through purchasing off-site credits, which is entirely in accordance with the mitigation hierarchy and relevant trading rules as advised by specialist ecologists. Indeed, the National Planning Guidance states that it's inappropriate to refuse applications on the basis of the BNG objective not being met in those circumstances. And while there are concerns about the impact on badgers, it's only a very small area of badger foraging habitat which would actually be lost. The ecologists have advised that badgers are already utilising the neighbouring land, and the development would not in itself result in impacts on either the protected badger sets or the badgers themselves. It is notable that as well as putting in place measures...
Please carry on, I'll give you another 30 seconds.
It is notable that as well as putting in place measures to protect and enhance the environment, the applicant has agreed £70,000 contribution towards upgrading local public rights of way network and providing a lasting benefit for local residents and supporting walking and active travel. We've worked positively with officers and consultees throughout the application process and remain committed to addressing any outstanding matters. So in summary, the proposal represents a significant investment in Cowes and is an appropriate form of development for this site. We very much hope that members feel able to support the application and demonstrate your support for the significant investment and job creation that this would bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spurgeon. Mr. Steve Smith. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and the committee. My name is Steve Smith and I'm the local McDonald's franchisee. I've been part of the McDonald's family since 1990, operate the 2 existing Isle of Wight restaurants and live on the island. The proposed 3 Gates Road restaurant would form part of my long-term investment in the island, alongside the new Newport drive-thru and the Sandown restaurant approved by this council last year. First and foremost, this restaurant would create between 100 and 120 new local jobs in Cowes. In addition to the 270 people I already employ across my existing Isle of Wight restaurants, and that's not including the 2 new that are on the horizon. These flexible full and part-time roles offer clear progression, training and development, with as many guaranteed hours contracts as required. Around 70% of our employees are under 24. We pay above the minimum wage for under 18s and above the national living wage for those aged 18 and over. McDonald's also offers more than 20 apprenticeship pathways, from entry-level qualifications to degree-level programs, such as the one that my business manager, Chelsea in Newport, is currently in her last year of, and she's set for first-class honours in this. Being a good neighbour is equally important, and aside from the extensive litter patrols we regularly complete, as I'm sure some of you know, I have personally been involved with countless community projects on the island, from community garden renovations, setting up Newport Business Association with some local councillors, and being a founding governor of the Island Free School in Ventnor, where I'm currently a director and trust member. Having another site in Cowes will only give me additional leverage to give even more back to this island that I so passionately care about. Safety is also a key priority for us. We work closely with councils and the police to ensure our restaurants are safe, well-managed places. Managers receive training in conflict resolution, and we take any concerns very seriously, working proactively with local partners where issues arise, and helping to alleviate any antisocial behaviour issues. Ultimately, we are the safe place and a safe space for a cross-section of the community all day, every day. This proposal represents a significant investment in Cowes, alongside creating vital jobs and providing greater choice for local residents. It will generate business rates for local services and deliver an agreed £70,000 contribution towards improving the local public right-of-way network. This proposal will bring lasting economic and community benefits to Cowes through local jobs, investment, safer, well-managed premises and support for local infrastructure. I hope members feel able to support this evening and place their trust in me yet again to deliver another vital economic and community opportunity for Cowes and the island. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next, we have the councillor for the ward, Councillor Adam Gordon. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the elected councillor for Cowes South and Northwood. My responsibility is to represent the people who live on my ward, while considering this planning application fairly, objectively, and with an open mind. I've listened to the residents, visited the site, read the application and considered both the benefits and the potential harm of this proposal. Having done so, I have reached the conclusion that this is simply the wrong development in the wrong location. Let me be clear. This is not about whether people like McDonald's. It's not about opposing investment, opposing employment. It's not about denying consumer choice. It's about whether a large drive-through restaurant is an appropriate development immediately adjacent to residential properties, some of which are locally listed buildings on one of the principal gateways into Cowes. In my judgment, it is not. My first concern is traffic and highway safety. 3 Gates Road already experienced significant traffic during commuter periods, school runs, and throughout the tourist season. Local residents know that congestion is already a reality. A drive-through restaurant is designed to attract a continuous flow of vehicles. That inevitability increases turning movements, queuing traffic, and pressure on the surrounding highway network. Excuse me. Even where technical highway standards are said to have been met, this committee must ask whether this is genuinely the right location for a development whose success depends upon a constant stream of vehicle movements. Planning is not simply about whether something can be made to work. It's about whether it's appropriate in its surroundings. Homes sit directly opposite this proposed development. Those residents should not have to accept increased vehicle movements, engines idling, car doors slamming, delivery vehicles, illuminated signage, vehicle headlights shining into their homes, and activities extending late into the night. Planning policy rightly requires us to protect the living conditions of existing residents. Once that amenity is lost, it's rarely recovered. I also ask the committee to give careful consideration to the environmental and ecological impact of this proposal. Development should do more than minimise harm. It should improve the environment wherever possible. I believe the applicant has submitted a biodiversity net gain assessment, and I welcome that. However, the committee's responsibility is not to note that a report has been provided. It's to be satisfied that the biodiversity improvements are genuine, measurable, deliverable, and secured for the long term. Since biodiversity net gain became a legal requirement for major developments, Parliament has made it clear that development should leave nature in a better condition than before. Members therefore must be satisfied that any habitat improvements are real, that increased lighting has been fully considered, that wildlife corridors are protected where appropriate, and the biodiversity gains will be maintained over the required period. Once habitat is lost and a site becomes increasingly urbanised, those changes are often permanent. I also believe we must consider the wider character of Cowes. It has a distinctive identity built on maritime heritage, independent businesses, and a strong sense of community. Our independent cafes, restaurants, and local food businesses contribute enormously to that character. I fully recognise that the competition between businesses is not, on its own, a planning reason to refuse an application. However, the committee is entitled to consider whether a development enhances or detracts from the character and vitality of the area, including its economic viability as recognised in policy DM9. There is also the wider question of public health. There is an increasing concern about the growth of fast food outlets, particularly where children and young people are present. While this application must be determined on its own planning merits, it's appropriate to acknowledge the wider direction of public policy towards healthier communities. I acknowledge that there could be benefits to this proposal. There could be investment and employment opportunities. These benefits deserve proper weight. But planning decisions require us to balance these benefits against the harm. Traffic, residential amenity, the character and economic viability of Cowes as recognised in policy DM9, environmental quality, ecology, biodiversity net gain, and the long-term effect on the community that I have the privilege to represent. Taken together, they create a compelling planning case that this proposal is in the wrong place. As councillors, we are custodians of our communities. Every planning decision leaves a legacy. Good planning is not about saying yes to every application, nor is it about saying no to development. It's about ensuring that development is in the right place, at the right scale, and genuinely enhances the community it serves. Having approached this application with an open mind, listened to my residents, and carefully considered the planning balance, my conclusion is very clear. This is not the right development in the right location. For these reasons, I respectfully ask the committee to refuse this planning application.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. And now finally, Laura Beattie-Wilcox, Councillor Wilcox, the adjoining local county councillor.
Thank you. The curveball arrives. Okay, people might be quite surprised to hear that I fully support the objectors, both the public, town and parish councils, and our new Isle of Wight ward councillor has been absolutely exceptional. I thank and respect the planning staff for recommending refusal. I will not repeat all of the reasons already stated so eloquently, particularly by the Hollises. But I would like to add my own objection. It's really rare I attend planning meetings. In 27 years as a councillor, I've only been vexed enough to be here 6 times, so that doesn't bode well. I have lived and used these roads my entire life. I, like all the objectors, and probably most of the supporters, have sat at the junction of Three Goats Road trying to pull out into Place Road. The junction as is will not be sufficient to cope with the extra traffic. The traffic report from Mr. Island Roads did his modelling on the road on a bleak, damp February back in 2024. Indeed, sad as I am, I looked up the weather to discover it was during the wake of Storm Louis, when we were told not to go out unless necessary. I would sincerely ask Mr. Island Roads to redo his tests, which range from this, get this right, Piccadilly, Arcady, Paragon, and Tricks. The last one sounds about right, to be honest, Tricks. Do your testing of both junctions during any or all of the following: Cows Week, Fire Week, Firework Night, the Ag Show, Round the Island Race, Takeover Weekend, or even the first day back at school. You will absolutely see a difference in numbers in modelling. Condition 3 does not go anywhere near far enough to address these concerns. It states, and this, well, access can be temporarily closed when impacts happen. Tell me how exactly this is going to work. You're stuck in a row of 65 cars, and what, is someone from McDonald's going to run up and down the road and tell people they can't go? Are they supposed to do a 3-point turn in the road? I mean, it's just hideously, but quite frankly, it's a joke that's not funny. The only true fact of the report that I can find is it says it could have a negative impact on Three Gates Road and highway safety. Hurrah! Yeah, he got something right. Now, you could think that I'm being a tad hysterical about this, but I'm not. I contacted the Ryde councillors who have the drive-through. They know and deal with the blocked roads on a regular basis. How many of us have been caught in it? The calls, the complaints, the raps. The application would never have been approved had they foreseen the dire consequences. Please let us not make the same mistake again here in Cowes. Please trust me for all the reasons and concerns raised so eloquently here this evening. I implore you to support the officer recommendation for refusal. Many thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Peachy Wilcox. I think, Sarah, there's a point you may wish to clarify.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Sorry, I just wanted to give some guidance to councillors before you put your minds to this application following the public speaking. Just a couple of points of clarity or clarification, I should say. Firstly, you are considering an application for a drive-through restaurant. The provider is, in essence, to an extent, not a material consideration. So kind of just be conscious of that. It is a planning use for a drive-through restaurant. Secondly, comments were made in the public speaking about an illuminated sign. This application in front of you does not include the advertisements. They are separate applications. So I would advise you strongly against giving any consideration to the potential signage, because that is a totally separate consenting regime that is subject to separate applications. They are not in front of you today. I would also advise you strongly against giving any weight to the loss of the housing approved on site. That is an potential alternative use of the site. The houses are not there. They are not providing accommodation. If the houses were there, you could give weight to the loss of those units. Although the development has been commenced, the houses are not providing accommodation for people. Therefore, I would advise you strongly against giving any weight to the loss of houses as a result of this development. It is simply a proposed alternative use of the site. The other point I just want to raise is there's been a lot of discussion about B&G and about mitigation hierarchies and about B&G hierarchies. I would just, members, you will have read the report, but I will just draw you back to 7.73 and 7.75 of the report. That clearly states out that this is not a situation where the applicant is stating they will not provide biodiversity net gain. It is just the method by which they're providing it that the local authority are not satisfied with, the justification for that method. So at no point are they suggesting they're exempt from it. They are proposing it, but just in a different form than we consider to be appropriate. I just wanted to make that clear because some comments were there that they thought they didn't need to provide it. They do. They are, but just in not the form we're looking for. A lot of comments have been made about the impact on the town centre. Competition is not a planning consideration. It is not a material planning consideration. You cannot have regard to competition. You can have regard to the impact on the town centre. That's the purposes of the sequential test. It looks at whether alternative sites are available. When looking at retail development, which I appreciate this isn't retail, but I'm going to call it retail because it's all encompassing in terms of town centre uses. So I'll say when looking at town centre uses, you are required for certain scales of applications to undertake an impact assessment. That then looks at the impact the development will have on the town centre outside of the sequential test process. This application doesn't hit those triggers in terms of floor space size. So the applicants weren't required to do an impact assessment, they were required to do a sequential test. That's what they've done. You have a reason for refusal relating to that. But competition is not a material planning consideration. Please bear that in mind. I also just want to clarify, final point, that the traffic assessment undertaken as part of the application was not undertaken by Island Roads. That is a submission of information. Island Roads have assessed that transport assessment in relation to guidance to do with transport. So you've got reference for manual for streets, you've got reference for other transport guidelines that we have to adhere to when assessing applications. Island Roads have assessed that. They have assessed the transport information to be acceptable. The use of programmes like Piccadilly and Trix are acceptable mechanisms to undertaking that assessment. We cannot object to the form that they've used acceptable electronic mechanisms to undertake that. And in relation to that, we would not expect a transport assessment to look at peak movements in relation to specific events. So you would not undertake a transport assessment during Cows Week because it is the exception, not the rule. You have to look at the standard, generally everyday processes. And so you, in essence, would be required to pick a date where it wouldn't fall in the school holidays, it wouldn't fall on any event day. And that is why you have that situation where it's an average. You don't look at one day, you look at a general average. So just giving you a little bit of advice on being cautious about giving too much weight to those aspects as and when they are material. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll now invite some questions through me, of course. Lots of questions. Rob. Oh. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I do know most of the people over there. I'd look to the legal officer to just check that that's okay. Obviously councillors do know most of the people, but I just thought I'd declare that I do know, obviously, Mr. and Mrs. Hollis, I know Richard, and I know Steve as well, from McDonald's, if that's okay, just to mention that. But I'm okay to proceed, thank you. No, my question is, I've got lots of comments to make, but my question is, were there any alternative sites? I mean, the biggest issue with this whole application really comes down to the site and the inappropriate place that it's looking to go. And were any other sites offered during this process? Were any other sites looked at? Or was it only ever, this is the site and that's all we're going to look at? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Perhaps you could answer.
Thank you, Chairman. Difficult question to answer, if I'm honest, especially not having been the case officer. But I think in essence, it's what planning can't look at is different sites offered. That is a totally separate process. That is a sale process rather than a planning process. The sequential test looks at other sites that were considered in terms of whether they were suitable or otherwise. Obviously, there's a conflict as in terms of officer's opinion and the applicant's opinion as to whether appropriate sites were considered. The challenge is always out of centre sites versus out of centre sites. So it may be considered there are other sites in the location which may be better placed to serve it, but if they are further from the town centre or they are a similar distance from the town centre, you can't give that weight in the planning process. So hopefully that helps. I know it doesn't directly answer your question because I can't tell you whether they looked at other sites to purchase, only that they have assessed alternative sites in the sequential test. There's a question over whether they have looked far enough or appropriateness in that assessment, but I can't directly answer the question. Sorry, Councillor Price.
Thank you. It was a cheeky question, but thank you.
Thank you, councillor Price. Councillor Newton.
Yes, so my question is actually referenced the noise test. Was it taken into account that the listed properties across the road have got a critical window construction, which obviously with a noise study, there's significant difference in noise compared to conventional windows nowadays, and obviously for the health of the residents with that, because looking at the 6 till 12 opening hours, that doesn't leave a lot of rest period in between.
Sarah.
Thanks, Chairman. I will skim through and try and have a quick look. It's unlikely that it considers the specific nature of the windows within that property. They may have given weight to whether they were single story or not single story, apologies, single glazed, or double glazed or triple glazed. But ultimately a noise assessment looks at background levels, and then looks at the uplift from those background levels and the impacts associated with that. However, what Environmental Health have done is in essence said that the fence is providing an acoustic barrier. So it's in essence saying there would be noise impacts if the fence wasn't there. But the fence is providing that acoustic barrier. In essence, it's therefore to some extent irrelevant, the size of the glazing or the nature of the glazing, because the impacts are identified, and then the proposal seeks to mitigate that with the fence. The difficulty with this is that officers consider that fence is unacceptable. But the Environmental Health have concluded that yes, that's why the fence is necessary. But if you give me 2 minutes, if others have questions, I will just put it up and triple check. But as far as I'm aware, it would not have taken consideration of the critical windows.
So I have another part to that question, because on the site visit, noting the road and the additional traffic that assumptionally would be there, there will be a lot of static traffic, and I believe it was brought in that mentioned that there would be measures brought in to divert vehicles away that if it was effectively overspill. I just wondered what their measures were, because from what I've observed from other sites, completely similar situations, the human nature, people will sit there and wait their turn and will not give it up. So.
Sarah.
Thanks, Chairman. In essence, the proposal, Mr. Charlton may be able to answer this better, but in essence, the situation would be that if there was an issue in the flow lanes, and they had to cut them off, in essence, they would close the entrance off and cars would be advised to move on by a member of staff. So it is a standard mechanism. It is something that we have put into other drive-throughs on the island. I would say that comparisons are being made to the existing drive-through in Ryde in terms of traffic impacts. Obviously, that is a very old drive-through. That is not a new one with the standards that are currently applied to stacking lanes. And so when that was approved, there wasn't a requirement for a right-hand turn lane. There wasn't an assessment of the movements associated with that use, or certainly not in modern day transport movements. But obviously this has been assessed in terms of the movements on the road, the movements into the site. Island Roads have actually concluded that they could hold more cars on site than the applicant has suggested because of the size of the stacking lanes, the amount of car parking that's being provided. So in terms of the movement, in essence, the entrance of the site would be closed off, potentially with cones, and then cars would be required to move on. I'm not sure whether anyone, certainly recently it's happened as an anecdotal point, being via Sainsbury's in Newport. Because they seem to very regularly at the moment be running out of certainly diesel and at sometimes fuel. They are simply putting cones out along the entrance and saying, sorry, no fuel. I haven't therefore seen people sit and wait in that. I appreciate it's a different circumstance because there will be times in which that flow will move, which is different from a petrol station running out of fuel, but it is a relatively common procedure to put cones out along an entrance to indicate to people that a site is closed for a period of time. I wouldn't anticipate, but ultimately this is just an anticipation, that people will therefore remain standing in Three Gates Road waiting for that to pass by. But that's just my opinion. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Loke.
It's a comment, Chair, if you don't mind. got a number of jobs being created on the site. Applicant says there's 270 jobs across the island. My concern would be how many jobs are created in Newport and how many in Ryde. Do they cross sites? Do they use additional staff at the same locations? And I'd also like to understand that their understanding of regards to the demand for jobs at the site. So they've done an evaluation. Obviously, they have other franchises, but how many people will they need on the site? Have they expected how busy it to be? Maybe that give us some indication of how much traffic is going to be on the site as a consideration to the planning application. It seems to me very often in these applications for planning that applicants will very often throw a big number in the air, the amount of vacancies it's going to create and opportunities it's going to create for young people without actually giving us the facts of how those jobs will be created due to demand. Thank you.
Do we have that information, Sarah?
In essence, it's to what extent it's unfortunately relevant to the considerations of this application, which is challenging. The application forms have indicated that the proposed development will result in 62 full-time equivalent jobs. So we use full-time equivalent because obviously you'll have some part-time, you'll have some full-time, you'll have a range. So that it works out on the basis of 62 full-time equivalent. So that is what they consider the site would bring to the area. And that is the information we have for that.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chairman. There's many things I could talk about in this application. I want to talk particularly about road safety. I was on the site visit, and I think there has been some clarity offered by Island Roads about the visibility displays that, you know, it's been said they actually meet the requirements. Personally, I'm not convinced. When you stood where the exit is, look to your right towards Aldi, it's a 40-mile-an-hour road and cars are belting around that corner. It does seem pretty borderline to me, but particularly there's been no mention or very little mention of pedestrian safety. And again, I've reiterated, it's a 40-mile-an-hour road. There is a footpath that is deemed to need improvement, which indicates a high level of footfall. There is a traffic island, but again, I'd reiterate, it's a 40-mile-an-hour road. Do we consider that safe for lots of potentially young people who are going to be attracted there on foot, and even older ones, a bit less nimble perhaps, trying to cross this road? Is there anything more that can be done to improve road safety? Or is that perhaps outside the scope of this application at the moment, but is going to come back anyway? For example, speed reduction, zebra crossing, or whatever.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Is that something you want to discuss or refer to Mr. Charlton?
Thanks, Chairman. I'll start because I'm going to refer to some slides and then I'll see if Mr. Charlton wishes to come in. Thank you, Chairman. I would firstly I'm going to put the slide up that shows the visibility displays because I think it's important to clarify this point. Yes, when we stood on site, it was very difficult to see in that direction. What you had there was the existing hedgerow boundary for the site, blocking the visibility. What you will have as a result of the development is that hedgerow will come out, or that natural growth. It's not a hedgerow all the way along there. That natural growth will come out. The site boundary will then be set back, which is shown by the blue, the areas that will be set in. And so you will then have a 3-metre wide footpath there. So the existing footpath will widen. And so actually you're not then, at the moment, you're looking almost round the hedgerow, which you can't do, or the natural growth. Without that being there and that fence line being set back behind the visibility, you will have a direct line of sight fully in compliance with the required standards for that speed of road. So that will be available. In terms of pedestrian safety, I in essence will let Neil come in if he wishes to and respond to this, but there would be a 3-metre wide footpath as part of this development. Outside of the site area where that footpath will be provided, there are footpaths on both sides of the road. There are crossing points within those roads. It would be unreasonable, I would suggest, for councillors to state that there would be an impact on pedestrians if there is an appropriate footpath on the side of that road. If the footpath were incredibly narrow and kind of less than 1 metre in width, and actually you therefore have to, in terms of crossing somebody with a buggy or in a wheelchair, you'd be forced into the carriageway. You may question whether the footpaths in a wider area need widening, not just in front of the site. But as you can see from the images, the footpaths are reasonably wide in terms of the movement of pedestrians. So I would advise against giving the impact, putting too much weight on the impact of pedestrian movements when we have compliant footpaths for them to walk on. If they choose not to, that's a different matter. You also have, which is in this image, directly opposite the right of way, you have a crossing point. So pedestrians are advised where it's safe to cross on that road, where there's the greatest visibility, and they only have to cross one carriageway. They don't have to cross both lines of traffic. And so in doing that, you are giving them a safe crossing point. So I would advise caution in going down that route in terms of impacts, but I don't know whether Neil wishes to add anything.
I think it's important to note that there is no existing highway safety problem on that section of the highway. There's not a single recorded personal injury collision there, so there's no existing issue. If you identify some measures which may improve the perceived safety, specifically in relation to vulnerable road users, so pedestrians, you'll be looking at the upgrade of the Spitter Island into a formal crossing point. Because it's 40 miles an hour, it can't be a zebra crossing, so it would have to be a signal controlled crossing point, pedestrian crossing point. In my opinion, that's disproportionate to the degree of impact the development would have in itself. You're looking at probably around about £120,000 worth of works to address something which is not currently a problem on the network, and the development itself will not generate enough pedestrian movements to warrant the need to provide that level of facility.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Neil. Any more questions? Councillor Jeffries.
Newton, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to change the subject a little bit now and go on to ecology. In the report, it says the badger set, which is present there, if closed, then the badgers could be moved somewhere else. But it looks apparent that there probably is nowhere else. I wonder if you could answer a question on that.
Sarah, moving badgers. Does that?
Thanks,
fall
Chairman.
under others?
I can't really add any more than this in the report, to be honest. You can move badgers, as it were. You can apply for a license, and you would have to kind of construct an artificial set and then relocate it. It's all done under license by Natural England. So it's one of those things that it's not a particularly positive aspect, but you can do it. I think the issue in relation to the information submitted with this application is that there appears to be some conflict between what the set is. Is it outer set? Is it a main set? Is the site just being used for foraging? How is that accompanied? And so that is why, apologies, reason for refusal 4 does talk about the impact on badgers. I didn't cover that in my summary, so my apologies. So yes, that is why the reason for refusal not only considers the loss of trees and the potential impact on bat roost, but also the impact on badgers as a result of proposed development. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Councillor Newton.
Yeah, so my question is reference traffic. So we seem to be looking at this planning application mainly coming from the Aldi point of view. Coming from the other direction, they're going to be crossing the lane, the same lane, and obviously that will cause necessary disruption from block traffic coming from behind them, traffic coming to having to wait, especially if there's slow entry into the site. I just wondered what precautions are taken for that.
Neil or Sarah, would you like to address that?
The modelling that's been carried out indicates that the priority junction works in capacity terms and in highway safety terms. In the issue, the right-hand turn lane, depending on the right-hand turn lane, generally you would need around about 6,000 vehicle movements a day on the main road. You'd need just short of 1,000 vehicle movements on the side road to justify the use of a Ghost Island arrangement for a right turn lane. The flows on that road are nowhere near the level which would suggest that a right turn lane would be required or necessary. There's also an issue about right turn lanes is they have their own safety problems. People use them for overtaking.
Sarah.
Sorry, I'm just going to reiterate what Neil just said because I think a couple of public speakers couldn't hear properly. So apologies. In essence, the level of traffic utilising the road and as the movements for the development would not justify a right-hand turn lane. The numbers just aren't high enough. And right-hand turn lanes in themselves can cause a potential highway impact because people utilise them for overtaking. But there wouldn't be a justification based on the number of vehicle movements, both in the existing road and as a result of proposed development, for a right-hand turn lane to stop standing vehicles, in essence, coming from the Aldi direction.
Councillor Garrett, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'd particularly like to explore, I'm having in mind what Ms Wilkinson has said about not having too much weight on pedestrian safety. But, and again, if Mr Charlton might move his microphone towards himself so that we could hear a little better, that'd be helpful. I may have missed it, but from what I understand, if we pass this application, there will be an increase in vehicular movement because it attracts vehicles along that road throughout its opening hours. And it attracts pedestrian movement by virtue of being a restaurant that people want to go to and easily accessible through, for example, the public right of way. So I may have misheard it in Mr Charlton's analysis, but he was referring to the current situation. Well, the current situation does not have a fast food restaurant at that place attracting more vehicular movements and more pedestrian movements. So I wonder if I could just get a little bit more exploration of actually what might be predicted in terms of number of pedestrian movements across a road which is 40 miles an hour, and the degree of conflict that might lead to in terms of the additional vehicular movements from both directions in coming to use the facility as a drive-through as well as a sit-down restaurant. So I just want to get more understanding of that, having regard to Ms Wilkinson's comments about the weight to be given to that.
Thank you, Andrew.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just want to reiterate, I didn't necessarily say give little weight to pedestrian safety. I don't mean that. What I just want to clarify is that where you have pavements by the side of the road, you would have to identify in what aspect it is unsafe for pedestrians. And I would advise caution in doing that. If there were no pavements on the road, you could reasonably say that you would be increasing the number of pedestrians using an unlit or an unprovided, a no pavement road, and the impact or harm would increase. But you would very carefully have to identify what increased harm would come to pedestrians who were utilising a compliant pavement. And that is why I say be careful with the weight you give to that point. In terms of pedestrian movements, when you're looking at highway safety, and Neil may want to come in after, sorry, Mr. Charlton, after I've said what I'm going to say. But in essence, when you're looking at highway safety, you have to start with the safety of the existing road and the existing number of movements on that road. So if there is no accident data on that road, it indicates that road is currently safe. In terms of design, in terms of accessibility, all of those things are safe. And therefore, you're starting from a premise of a safe road. You're starting with a premise of a road that has footpaths on either way. In terms of you're then looking at the level of traffic associated with the development and whether that exponentially makes it very harmful. Bearing in mind, the NPPF talks about severe. We're not talking about an increase in harm. There is likely to be an increase in harm as you increase the traffic movements, but it's the severity of that you need to give consideration to. It's very difficult to say how many people would walk to a drive-through restaurant. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, actually, 90% of the clientele will come by foot. You can predict the amount that will come by car because you can use what we use is Trix database, which kind of looks at comparative sites. And it says actually in a similar location away from a town centre at X proximity to residential properties, you're likely to have this many people travelling by car. It's much harder with pedestrians. Also, the proposal, if approved, would contribute a significant contribution to the enhancements of CS7, which is directly opposite the site and leads you directly to Place Road. It leads you directly to Seaview Road housing development. And so it would, in essence, be seeking to encourage anyone accessing the site as a pedestrian to either use the existing rights of way network, which would be enhanced to encourage them to do so and to make it suitable for the number of pedestrians utilising it, as well as the existing pavement network in and around the site. So the reason for refusal relating to the lack of enhancements to the public right of way to an extent speaks to that, because actually without that you would be seeing an increased use of CS7 that would not be mitigated. But in terms of actually the number of pedestrians accessing the site, it is likely to be an increase, but not to the extent that it would necessarily justify that. It would be, what would the mitigation be in order to enhance it? Would it be a widening of every footpath in that area to 3 metres? The reason you have a 3-metre footpath is that it becomes, in essence, a multi-user path. So it allows for cycles and pedestrians to utilise it. We're not talking about accessibility for cyclists in this, we're talking about pedestrians at this point in time. And I think from the perspective of the application, it would be, is it reasonable to require the existing pavements to be widened for their entire length for the sake of the pedestrian movements associated with the development? Officers consider not, Island Roads consider not. So the road, if the road is currently safe for pedestrians, increasing traffic isn't necessarily going to make it unsafe for pedestrians, providing they have a pavement to stand on. And I don't think anyone would suggest that the number of pedestrians accessing this site would be such that the existing pavements wouldn't be acceptable or appropriate, because they'd be too narrow for the number of people going to the site. They are standard acceptable pavements. Hopefully that answers the question.
Very much so. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
you explored it.
Thank you. If I may, Chairman, I just wanted to come back and answer one of the questions that Councillor Newton had earlier, which I said I would come back to you on, in terms of windows in the locally listed cottages. Thanks, Chairman. The noise report doesn't specifically reference critical windows or the windows. What it does say is it talks about so it says this shows the highest predicted daytime plant noise levels will be outside of the ground floor windows of Daphne Cottage. So it looks at the levels outside and how they compare to the existing background levels outside, both in the daytime and the nighttime, rather than inside the property. And hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Kirkby.
Yeah, I am a newbie to the planning committee, etc. But so this question might have been answered already, but is any consideration given to the light pollution to the properties opposite? Because this place, it will be, I know it's 7 till 12 now, if it follows in the footsteps of Ryde, it's going to be a 24-hour drive through. Even with the 24-hour drive, 7 till 12, the lights are going to be lit up, the car parks, etc. Do we ever take into consideration the light pollution to the properties opposite, if I may ask?
Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. I am going to draw Councillor Kirkby's attention to section in the officer report that refers to impact on neighbouring properties, paragraph 7.46 through to 7.48, which reference the assessment of the impact on the neighbouring properties from lighting associated with the proposed development, and how actually, yes, there is a requirement for levels of lighting on the basis of crime, and the crime prevention advisor. And then how the lighting assessment has been submitted with the application. In essence, the proposed fencing would cause for the development, setting aside the advert, as we have already said we need to, the proposed fencing would provide, in essence, a block for that lighting, which is part of the reason why that fencing was required. Also, the proposed operational hours would be such that they consider the potential of the lighting as well. In terms of nighttime disturbance. So nighttime, rightly or wrongly, from a perspective of environmental health, starts at 11 p.m. And obviously the lighting would be off at that point. But as you'll see, so it's summarised in paragraph 7.48 that it says that despite the proposed 2.4 metre fence boundary, so the fence line is part of that mitigation for any light spillage. So yes, it has been considered, in short.
Thank you, Sarah. Any more questions?
Seeing as it's a drive-through, people taking food away, who's going to pick up the cost for extra bin emptying away from the site?
Sarah.
Thanks, Chairman. So consideration is given to the potential for litter in and around the site. So McDonald's will generally, and have in association with the recently approved developments, entered into an effectively a litter collection plan, in which they cover a radius of the site. We'd propose, if this application was to be approved, that covered nearly the entirety of footpath CS7. Because that is the potential movement of people. In terms of the litter bins in and around the vicinity that they'd be going to, we wouldn't ever require a developer to kind of contribute towards the emptying of those, or the fact that they may be filled quicker, because you can't identify where someone's going to take that food. A proportion of people will eat it in their cars somewhere, a proportion of people will simply take it home and eat it at home. It's very difficult to distribute other than going through each bin and working out how many packaging associated with McDonald's, how many associated with any other facility in the vicinity. That's challenging to say. You wouldn't be able to attribute an existing harm to that in planning terms.
Thank you, Sarah. Any more questions? Any more comments? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Adam for his eloquent sort of presentation to us on behalf of his residents. Excellent work. Really put well across, I think. And I think you nailed it in many ways, and good to have you a joining member alongside to support you. What I must also say is, you know, I've been in my planning application with Mr. Smith there before, and I know him through Newport Business Association, and I do absolutely respect the employment opportunities that McDonald's bring to young people in particular. You know, many of our young people start off with their first job at McDonald's, and it's led to really good careers for many of them in hospitality and catering and so on. And many of them are there and have been there for a long time with you, and I know that. And you know, so I think it's very unfair for us to be actually judging that particular model of business, because I think they, you know, whether you eat McDonald's or not is irrelevant, because some people want to eat McDonald's, and there is clearly a need for it because they got thousands and thousands of customers. So, you know, I just wanted to make a point that I think the employment opportunities that you spoke about actually in many ways are realistic. And they do deliver many things in the community, and certainly have done in Newport, and an exceptional regime for litter collection in around their restaurant area. But I'll be soon judging them on the drive-through when that opens. So, you know, I'm always here to be convinced. I come here with an open mind for every application, and I've got to say, when it comes to the way the objectors spoke, I think they came across exactly as they should have done, and sort of nailed it in many ways. But I do feel that the applicant's agent failed to address any of the real reasons that we're looking to refuse this application, went off into many other things, but really failed to nail, you know, you could have gone through those 6 reasons and actually justified all of them, and I don't feel you did. But anyway, you've had your time to say and convince us, let's say. You know, I feel, you know, how many more McDonald's can you have on the Isle of Wight? Maybe that's not a planning consideration, but it's but I think it is, you know, for me as a Newport councillor, you know, we're soon to have another McDonald's in Newport, and you know, if one opens in Cowes, you know, it could damage one of the ones in Newport. So, you know, I think there's going to be a saturation point. That being said, you know, I've read lots and lots of support for this online. I do take notice of what everyone says, and I take my bits of information in from social media and the planning portal and so on. And I do think the public's view is really, really important. But this is absolutely the wrong place for this activity. You know, you could put it a stone throw away from here and it would work completely differently. It is just the wrong place. If it was down the back of Esplanade, I don't think you'd have anyone here moaning at all. Some of the reasons for rejection, of course, would be difficult to overcome on that. But the reality of it is when it comes to the public's perception of where a right and wrong place is, if there's a site nearby that would equally be as good or better, surely you should be exploring that, not trying to slide it into this tiny little slither of land right on the edge of the housing area, you know, development, residential development. You know, it just makes no sense that you'd be pursuing it there. So I'm sorry. I think I agree with everything the officers have put in here. I agree with everything that Councillor Hollis came up with. And you know, and I've gone back through those and took note of some of the reasons that Richard came up with, and they are pretty much nailed in the reasons for rejection. I think there's an absence of a pedestrian crossing there. You know, I mean, why are we not talking about how pedestrians can safely cross the road there? There's so many reasons for this to be turned down, and it's nothing to do with McDonald's, and it's nothing to do with the employment opportunities. It's everything else that is in front of us is the reason to turn it down. I mean, why we would be even here debating this, I just cannot understand. The applicant would think it would be workable to put this opposite all of those houses. You know, you've got, it's not just the houses opposite, you've got Rogerton Close and the rest of Seaview Road and so on. And you know, there's so many residential properties around there, and then you know, you do come into things like the schools, which I don't entirely agree with, because McDonald's are always near a school somehow. You know, we're going to have 2 in Newport that are a short walk from schools and all the rest of it. But I still feel that this is the wrong place for this application. I think, you know, my main reasons at this point is the effect on the nearby residents, the loss of trees and other wildlife and ecology issues, which clearly haven't been addressed. The lack of a legal agreement. I mean, come on, McDonald's, you can do better than this. You know, you've done how many applications around the country and you can't even get that right. And, you know, we're sat here without a legal agreement that we can, you know, substantially agree to or alter. So, you know, there are so many reasons to turn this down. And I feel sorry for that, because I don't want to say no to employment. And I don't want to say no to giving people the opportunity for having a McDonald's nearby. But I certainly want to make sure that we don't have this, you know, this activity built in the wrong location, which is going to cause an endless amount of issues. So I feel that at this point, I would recommend that we refuse this application in line with the officer's recommendations. Thank you. And I'll look for a seconder.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Garrett.
Yeah, I would indeed second Councillor Price on that. He has identified at length the deficiencies in this application. Those deficiencies are very well laid out in the officer's report, and the supplementary paper has discussed additional information. For me, it rests on 3 things: the policy relating to health, policy relating to economy, and policy relating to amenity. On health, we have the MPPF, paragraph 97, being very clear, and Ms. Wilkinson was quite clear about what that should mean. It is almost a direction. We would therefore need to have very strong reasons to overcome paragraph 97 of the MPPF, and so that's what needs to be looked at next. My only other time on this committee many years ago considered sequential development, so I'm somewhat familiar with that, and Ms. Wilkinson will recall that. It does appear to be deficient, the discussion around that, and so that doesn't overcome the paragraph 97 issue. And then we have the amenity in the area. Councillor Price has gone into that. The objectors gave us some insight into the amenity side of things. So I won't go on as long as Councillor Price, because he did it so well and eloquently and always does. But I would absolutely want to second, if it's not already been done, to second that this be refused on the grounds as set out, I think it's paragraph 10 of the officer's report. There are so many reasons there that even overcoming one, however much we might twist ourselves around it, doesn't overcome the others. And so I think there is very strong weight indeed for us to refuse this application. That is not that I am against fast food. I have enjoyed, rather too many fries and burgers in my life. And I would wish the applicant success in finding a site that does meet the criteria that we as a planning committee would find acceptable, and we indeed have seen acceptable sites in our towns. But this is not within a town, and therefore I will leave it at that.
Thank you, councillor Garrett. I'm minded to move on as we've got a proposer and a seconder to a vote, please. If you're happy with that. So all those in favour of the motion refusal, raise your hands, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Against?
None.
Abstentions? Permission refused.
Then you could, unless there's any urgent ones which someone puts up, they shouldn't be.
Right. So,
Simply vote to just close the meeting.
so for members, we've received no members' question time. No questions put forward, so I would propose to close the meeting. Thank you. Thank you for attending.